What would a man do if he discovered his entire life was built on a lie? Dominic Caruso thought he already knew the answer. He had lived 2 years in that hell already. Lost his wife, lost his father, lost his empire, lost his honor, all because of one medical report that declared him sterile. 2 years ago, Dominic was the ghost, the shadow that made all of Chicago tremble. The Caruso crime family's empire rested in his hands. His signature decided who lived and who died. His name alone kept enemies awake at night. But tonight, standing in the pouring rain at a rundown bus stop on Chicago's South Side, wearing a suit that once cost $5,000 but now frayed at the elbows, he discovered the lie was far bigger than he ever imagined. Because standing before him was Elena, the nanny he had once loved desperately, the girl who had crawled out of a hell even worse than his own, the woman he had let slip away on the darkest night of his life. And beside her, 2 little boys, twins, black hair like his, storm gray eyes like his, square jaw like his, a crescent-shaped birthmark behind the left ear exactly where his was. Luca and Matteo, Elena said, her voice trembling, tears mixing with rain on her cheeks. 2 years and 4 months old. 2 years and 4 months. That meant she was pregnant when she quit. Pregnant when he was declared sterile. Pregnant when the whole world turned its back on him. Pregnant, and she never said a word. Dominic Caruso, the man who once made all of Chicago fear his shadow, fell to his knees on the wet pavement. Because if these children existed, then that medical report was fake. And if the report was fake, then someone had deliberately destroyed his life, stolen his empire, stolen his family, stolen 2 years he should have spent with the children he never knew he had. Only one question remained. Who and why? 3 years ago, Dominic Caruso was untouchable. At 34 years old, he stood at the pinnacle of an empire his family had built over 3 generations. The Caruso crime syndicate controlled Chicago like a spider, controls its web, every thread connected, every vibration felt, every intruder eliminated before they even knew they were trapped. They called him the Ghost. Not because he was invisible. Dominic Caruso was impossible to miss. 6'2", broad shoulders carved from years of disciplined training, black hair swept back from a face that could have belonged to a Roman emperor. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, cold and calculating, the kind of eyes that made men confess sins they hadn't yet committed. Behind his left ear, barely visible beneath his hairline, sat a crescent-shaped birthmark, the only soft thing about him. No, they called him the Ghost because of what happened to his enemies. They simply disappeared. No bodies, no evidence, no witnesses. One day, a rival would threaten the Caruso territory, and the next day, that rival would vanish as if he had never existed. The police had investigated Dominic 17 times. 17 times they found nothing. His empire stretched across every corner of Chicago. The gambling operations on the South Side, the real estate holdings in Lincoln Park and Gold Coast, the protection services that kept businesses safe from everyone except the Carusos, of course. His legitimate front companies employed over 2,000 people. His illegitimate ones employed twice that number. The Caruso mansion in Gold Coast was a fortress disguised as elegance, 40 rooms, 23 bathrooms, a staff of 15, and security systems that would make the Pentagon jealous. 200 men answered to Dominic's command. His signature on a piece of paper could make a man rich or make him dead. His word was law in the underworld, and even the legitimate world bent to accommodate him. Every politician knew his name. Every police captain knew to look the other way. Every businessman knew that a partnership with Caruso meant protection, and a rivalry meant destruction. Dominic had everything. And yet, every night, after the meetings ended and the men went home, after the phone calls stopped and the mansion fell silent, Dominic would retreat to his private study on the 3rd floor. He would pour himself a glass of whiskey, always Macallan, always neat, and he would sit in the leather chair that had belonged to his grandfather. And he would look at the photograph on his desk. His mother, Maria Caruso, dead 15 years now, taken by cancer when Dominic was just 19. She was the only person who had ever looked at him without fear. The only person who had ever seen past the ghost to the boy underneath. "You have your father's ambition," she used to say, "but you have my heart. Don't let this life kill it, Dominic. Promise me." He had promised. But sitting alone in that study, surrounded by wealth and power and everything money could buy, Dominic wasn't sure he had kept that promise. He had no wife who loved him, no children who ran to greet him, no one who cared whether he lived or died except for what they could gain from him. He was 34 years old, and he was completely, utterly alone. What good was an empire if there was no one to share it with? What good was power if it couldn't buy him the one thing he truly wanted? A family. A real family. Someone to come home to. Someone who would look at him the way his mother once had, with love instead of fear. But men like Dominic Caruso didn't get love stories. They got alliances. They got arrangements. They got marriages built on strategy instead of affection. At least, that's what Dominic believed. Until his father decided to solve that problem for him. Dominic Caruso had everything money could buy. But the one thing he wanted most, a real family, seemed forever out of reach, until his father decided to solve that problem for him. Giovanni Caruso had never been a patient man. At 62 years old, the former head of the Caruso empire had one obsession that kept him awake at night: legacy. He had built an empire from nothing, expanded it into something that made even the New York families respect him. And now he needed someone to inherit it, someone with Caruso blood. "You need a wife," Giovanni announced one evening, summoning Dominic to his private office. "And I have found you the perfect one." Dominic didn't bother to argue. In their world, marriage was never about love. It was about power, about alliances, about survival. "The Blackwells," Giovanni continued, sliding a photograph across the desk. "Victoria Blackwell has a daughter, Isabel, 29 years old. Beautiful, educated, and more importantly, marrying her will end the war between our families once and for all." The Blackwells, for 2 decades, they had been the Carusos' most dangerous rivals. Their territory covered the North Side. Their influence stretched into politics, and their hatred for the Caruso name had spilled blood on Chicago streets more times than anyone could count. But Victoria Blackwell was a practical woman. War was expensive. War was unpredictable. And war, eventually, destroyed everyone involved. A marriage alliance would give her something far more valuable than victory. It would give her access. Access to the Caruso empire. Access to their wealth. Access to their power. Dominic studied the photograph. Isabel Blackwell stared back at him with ice-blue eyes and a face that belonged on magazine covers. She was beautiful, certainly, but there was something cold in her expression. Something calculated. "When?" Dominic asked. Giovanni smiled. 3 months. The Drake Hotel. 500 guests. Every family in the country will attend. The wedding was everything Chicago's underworld had ever seen. The Drake Hotel transformed into a palace of white roses and crystal chandeliers. 500 guests filled the grand ballroom. Crime bosses, politicians, celebrities, and businessmen who pretended not to know where Caruso money came from. The newspapers called it the wedding of the century. They weren't wrong. Isabel walked down the aisle in a gown that cost more than most people's houses. Her blonde hair was swept up in an elegant twist. Her makeup was flawless. Her smile was perfect. And her eyes were absolutely empty. Dominic stood at the altar, watching his bride approach, and felt nothing. No excitement. No nervousness, no hope, just a hollow acceptance of what his life had become, a series of transactions dressed up as traditions. They exchanged vows, they exchanged rings, they kissed for the cameras. And that night, in the honeymoon suite overlooking Lake Michigan, Isabel turned to him with that same cold smile. "Let me be clear about something, Dominic." Her voice was as frigid as her eyes. "This is a business arrangement, nothing more. I will play the role of your wife in public. I will attend your events. I will smile for your associates, but do not expect anything beyond that." She walked to the bedroom door and paused. "I'll be sleeping in the guest suite. Good night." The door clicked shut behind her. 5 years. For 5 years, Dominic lived with a woman who treated him like a stranger. They shared a mansion but never shared a meal. They attended events together but never touched unless cameras were watching. They occupied the same house but existed in completely different worlds. And the pressure never stopped. Victoria Blackwell visited every month, her sharp eyes scanning Isabel's midsection for any sign of pregnancy. "The alliance needs to be secured," she would say, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "A child would cement everything." Giovanni was worse. "What is wrong with you?" he demanded during one explosive argument. "The Caruso family needs an heir. Our bloodline cannot end with you." Isabel's response was always the same, a dismissive shrug and a pointed glance at Dominic. "Perhaps the problem isn't with me. Perhaps you should have your son examined." The implication hung in the air like poison. And Dominic, trapped between a father who saw him as a disappointment and a wife who saw him as an inconvenience, retreated further and further into isolation. For 5 years, Dominic lived in a mansion that felt like a tomb. He had a wife who looked through him like glass, and a family that only saw him as a means to an end. Then, one rainy March morning, a woman with broken eyes and a worn suitcase walked through his door, and everything changed. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight when she arrived, Elena Vasquez stood at the servants' entrance of the Caruso mansion, clutching a worn suitcase held together with duct tape and prayers. She was 24 years old, but her eyes belonged to someone who had lived 100 lifetimes. Large brown eyes that held shadows most people couldn't imagine, yet somehow still flickered with hope. Her story began with love, parents who dreamed of a better life, who saved every peso to cross the border into Texas. She was 12 when the smuggler's truck overturned on a desert highway. Her father died instantly. Her mother lived long enough to whisper, "Survive, Mija. Whatever happens, survive." Elena survived. She survived 4 years in Texas foster homes, overcrowded, violent places where staff used fists and older kids stole food from younger ones. She learned to sleep with one eye open. She survived being kidnapped at 16 by a man with a friendly smile who promised her a job in Las Vegas. The job was a lie. For 3 years, she was locked in basements, forced to work in a massage parlor, beaten whenever she resisted. At 19, an FBI raid set her free. She refused witness protection. The system had never protected her before. So she ran. For 5 years, Elena lived in shadows, washing dishes for cash, cleaning offices at midnight, picking strawberries until her fingers bled, teaching herself English from library books, sleeping in shelters or bus stations. At 24, a staffing agency sent her to Chicago. A wealthy family needs a housekeeper. Live-in position. Now she stared up at the Caruso mansion like it was a fairy tale palace. On her 3rd day, she was polishing banisters when Dominic descended the staircase. Everyone looked at him with fear, but Elena didn't look away. She didn't tremble. She simply met his gaze, steady and calm. Dominic stopped mid-step. No one had ever looked at him like that, like he was just a man. "You're new," he said. "Yes, Mr. Caruso, and you're not afraid of me." Elena thought about everything she had survived: the truck, the beatings, the basement, the streets. "I've survived things more frightening than you, Mr. Caruso," she said quietly, with respect. For a moment, silence. Then the corner of his mouth twitched upward. "What's your name?" "Elena. Elena Vasquez." He nodded, studying her with storm-gray eyes, then continued down the stairs. But he glanced back before disappearing, and for the rest of that day, Dominic couldn't stop thinking about the woman with broken eyes who wasn't afraid of the ghost. Elena Vasquez had survived hell. She didn't know that the heaven she thought she'd found in this mansion would soon become a different kind of hell, one built on lies, betrayal, and a love that was never supposed to exist. For 6 months, Elena Vasquez was invisible. She cleaned rooms that no one noticed were dirty. She cooked meals that no one thanked her for. She moved through the Caruso mansion like a ghost, ironic, given who owned it. Isabel never learned her name. "You there," she would snap, gesturing vaguely. "Clean this up." Or simply, "Girl, bring my tea." To Isabel, Elena was furniture. Functional. Forgettable. Victoria Blackwell was worse. Whenever she visited, her eyes would sweep over Elena with undisguised contempt. "Giovanni," she remarked once, loud enough for Elena to hear, "you really should hire staff with better breeding. This one looks like she crawled out of a gutter." Elena said nothing. She had survived worse than cruel words from cruel women. But there was one person in that mansion who saw her. Dominic Caruso worked late. Every night, long after the household fell asleep, light glowed from his 3rd-floor study. He reviewed accounts, took phone calls, planned operations that Elena knew better than to ask about. And every night, around 2 a.m, Elena would bring him coffee. At first, they didn't speak. She would set the cup on his desk, and he would nod without looking up. But slowly, over weeks, silence turned into sentences. Sentences turned into conversations. "Why aren't you asleep?" he asked one night. "I don't sleep well," she admitted. "Bad dreams?" He studied her face. "What do you dream about?" No one had ever asked her that. Not what haunted her, but what she dreamed of. "When I was little," she said softly, "I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to help children learn to read." She smiled sadly. "Silly, right?" "No." His voice was quiet. "Not silly at all." The conversations continued. She told him about her parents, about Mexico, about the dreams she had buried beneath years of survival. He told her about the weight of his name, the loneliness of power, the prison that his life had become. "Do you ever wish you could live a different life?" she asked one night. Dominic set down his pen and looked at her, really looked at her. "Every day, Elena, every day." Then came the night that changed everything. Isabel had left for Paris with Victoria, 3 weeks of shopping and spa treatments. The mansion felt emptier than usual, quieter. That night, a storm rolled across Chicago. Thunder shook the windows, lightning split the sky, and then the power went out. Darkness swallowed the mansion. Elena's mind snapped backward to basements, to locked rooms, to hands grabbing her in the dark. Her breath came in gasps. Her body trembled. She stumbled into the kitchen and collapsed into a corner, knees pulled to her chest, tears streaming down her face. That's where Dominic found her. He had been searching for candles when he heard the sobbing. He followed the sound and discovered Elena curled on the cold tile floor, shaking like a wounded animal. Elena. He knelt beside her. Elena, look at me. She couldn't. The darkness was everywhere. The memories were everywhere. So Dominic did something he had never done before. He pulled her into his arms and held her. You're safe, he whispered. I've got you. You're safe. For a long time, they stayed like that, the mafia boss and the broken girl, wrapped together in the darkness. His hand stroked her hair. Her tears soaked his shirt. When she finally lifted her face, their eyes met, and something shifted between them, something dangerous, something undeniable. He kissed her. It was soft at first, gentle. A question rather than a demand. And when she kissed him back, it felt like the first breath after years of drowning. In the arms of the most dangerous man in Chicago, the girl the world had broken felt safe for the first time in her life. But that safety came with a price, one that could cost them both everything. For 3 weeks, they lived inside a bubble. With Isabel in Paris, the mansion transformed. The cold marble halls that had felt like a prison now felt like a sanctuary. Dominic stopped working at midnight. Elena stopped hiding in shadows. And together, they discovered something neither had ever experienced before. Happiness. It wasn't just physical, though. That was part of it. It was the conversations that lasted until dawn, the laughter that echoed through empty rooms, the way Dominic looked at her like she was the most precious thing he had ever seen. One night, lying beside him in the darkness of his bedroom, Elena finally told him everything. The truck accident, the foster homes, the basement in Las Vegas, the years of running and hiding and surviving. She expected him to recoil, to see her as damaged, dirty. Instead, Dominic pulled her closer and pressed his lips to her forehead. You're not a victim, Elena, he said quietly. You're a survivor, the strongest person I've ever known. She cried then, not from sadness, but from relief, from finally being seen. In return, Dominic shared his own secrets. I've never killed anyone, he admitted one night, staring at the ceiling. Not with my own hands. I know what people think. The ghost, the monster who makes enemies disappear. But I've always delegated. Because the truth is, Elena, I hate violence. I hate what this life requires. Then why do you stay? Because I don't know how to leave. Because my father built this empire for me. Because if I walk away, everything falls apart. He turned to face her. You're the only person who's ever made me want to try. 3 weeks of stolen heaven. Then Isabel came home. The moment her car pulled through the gates, the bubble shattered. Elena went back to being invisible. Dominic went back to being cold. They passed each other in hallways without a glance, spoke only when necessary, pretended that nothing had changed. But everything had changed. They couldn't stay away from each other. Late nights in his study, the door locked, voices hushed. Stolen moments in the old storage shed behind the garden, hidden from security cameras. Quick touches in empty corridors. Desperate kisses in darkened rooms. Every meeting was a dance with death. In the mafia world, betrayal had only one punishment. If anyone discovered that Dominic Caruso was sleeping with a servant worse, that he had fallen in love with her, Elena would disappear. Not the way Dominic's enemies disappeared. Worse. She knew the risk. He knew the risk. Neither could stop. 6 weeks after Isabel's return, Elena noticed something was wrong. Her body felt different. Her stomach turned at the smell of coffee. Her breasts ached. She bought a pregnancy test from a pharmacy 3 neighborhoods away, paid cash, wore a hat to hide her face. In the tiny bathroom of her servants' quarters, she watched 2 pink lines appear. Positive. Elena's hands shook so violently she dropped the test. Pregnant. She was pregnant with Dominic Caruso's child. If anyone found out, if Isabel found out, if Victoria found out, if Giovanni found out she was dead, there would be no trial, no mercy. Just a body that no one would ever find. She couldn't tell Dominic. Not yet. Telling him meant forcing him to choose between her and his empire, and she couldn't do that to him. She needed to leave. Quietly, before anyone noticed, Elena pressed her hand against her flat stomach and made a silent promise to the life growing inside her. I will protect you, whatever it takes. I will get us out of here. She just needed time to plan. But time was the one thing she didn't have. Elena carried a secret that could kill her. But she didn't know that a far more dangerous conspiracy was already in motion, and both she and Dominic were its targets. Victoria Blackwell had not clawed her way to power by being patient. At 58 years old, she had orchestrated more schemes than most politicians could dream of. She had destroyed rivals, manipulated allies, and built the Blackwell empire into something that rivaled even the Carusos. But she wanted more. She wanted everything. The marriage between Isabel and Dominic had been her masterstroke, or so she thought. Unite the two families, produce an heir with Blackwell and Caruso blood, and Victoria would control the next generation. Simple, elegant, perfect. But 5 years had passed. No pregnancy, new hair, new control. Victoria sat in her private study, swirling bourbon in a crystal glass, calculating her options. Option 1. Dominic fathers a child with Isabel. The child carries both bloodlines. Victoria influences the child through her daughter. Eventually, the Caruso empire falls under Blackwell control. Option 2. Dominic cannot father a child. Isabel divorces him. The alliance crumbles. And in the chaos, the Blackwells swallow what remains of the Caruso territory. Victoria smiled coldly. Option 2 was faster, cleaner, and far more satisfying. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. Dr. Richard Harrington answered on the second ring. Victoria, it's late. I need a favor, Richard. Harrington had been the Blackwell family physician for 30 years. He had falsified medical records, prescribed medications that shouldn't be prescribed, and made certain problems disappear when Victoria required discretion. He owed her his career, his reputation, his freedom. What kind of favor? His voice was cautious. I need medical test results. Specifically, I need results that show Dominic Caruso is completely sterile, azoospermia, untreatable, permanent. Silence stretched across the line. Victoria, falsifying medical records is something you've done for me before. Her voice turned sharp as a blade. Remember the senator's daughter? The overdose that never happened? The autopsy that listed natural causes? More silence. You owe me, Richard, more than you can ever repay. So when I ask you for a simple piece of paper, you say yes. Understood? Harrington's sigh crackled through the phone. How do I get his samples? Leave that to me. The next evening, Victoria visited the Caruso mansion. She found Isabel in the sunroom, flipping through a fashion magazine with practiced boredom. Darling, Victoria said, settling into a chair across from her daughter. We need to discuss your husband. Isabel didn't look up. What about him? 5 years, Isabel. 5 years and no child. The families are starting to talk. Giovanni is growing impatient. Something must be done. What do you suggest? I can't exactly force him to. You can suggest he see a doctor. Victoria's smile was poison wrapped in silk. Frame it as concern. Tell him you want to rule out any medical issues on his side, of course. Men are prideful creatures. He'll want to prove there's nothing wrong with him. Isabel finally looked up, understanding dawning in her ice blue eyes. And the results will show exactly what we need them to show. That night, Isabel approached Dominic in his study with an expression of carefully rehearsed concern. Dominic, can we talk? He looked up from his paperwork, surprised. They rarely talked anymore. My mother has been asking about children. Isabel sat across from him, folding her hands. And I've been thinking, we've been married 5 years. Perhaps we should see a specialist. Rule out any medical issues. She paused delicately. On both sides. Dominic studied her face. For a moment, suspicion flickered in his storm-gray eyes. But then he thought about Giovanni's constant pressure, the whispers among the families, the accusations that had always pointed at him. Fine, he said. I'll see a doctor. I know someone excellent. Dr. Richard Harrington. He's been our family physician for years. 3 days later, Dominic sat in Harrington's pristine office, giving samples and answering questions while the doctor smiled his reassuring smile. We should have results within a week, Mr. Caruso. I'm sure everything will be perfectly normal. As Dominic left, Harrington's smile faded. He picked up his phone. It's done, he told Victoria. The results will say exactly what you want them to say. The trap was set. The pieces were in place. And Dominic Caruso, the man who had outsmarted every enemy, was about to be destroyed by the people he called family. 1 week later, Dominic sat in Dr. Harrington's office. The room was designed to feel comforting, soft lighting, leather chairs, diplomas lining the walls. But something in the air felt wrong, heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. Isabel sat beside him, her posture perfect, her face carefully neutral. She hadn't touched him during the drive over. hadn't spoken more than necessary. But that was normal. That was their marriage. Dr. Harrington entered, carrying a manila folder. His expression was somber, practiced, rehearsed, though Dominic couldn't have known that. Mr. Caruso. Mrs. Caruso. He settled behind his desk and placed the folder between them. "Thank you for coming in. Just tell me the results," Dominic said. "Is everything normal?" Harrington hesitated, adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat. "I'm afraid I have difficult news." The words hung in the air like smoke. "Mr. Caruso, your tests show a condition called azoospermia, complete azoospermia." He paused, letting the medical term sink in. "It means there are no viable sperm in your samples. None whatsoever." Dominic heard the words, but they didn't make sense. They couldn't make sense. What does that mean? His voice sounded distant, foreign. "It means—" Harrington folded his hands with false sympathy. "You cannot father children, Mr. Caruso. I'm very sorry." The room tilted. Dominic felt like someone had driven a fist through his chest and ripped out everything inside. The air disappeared from his lungs. Sounds became muffled, distorted, like he was underwater. Beside him, Isabel released a long, theatrical sigh. "Oh, Dominic." Her voice dripped with manufactured disappointment. This is devastating." She was acting. Some distant part of his brain recognized it. But the larger part, the part that was crumbling, couldn't process anything beyond the words on that paper. No children. Ever. There must be a mistake. Dominic's voice cracked. "Run the tests again." "We already did." Harrington shook his head slowly. 3 times. "Mr. Caruso, the results are consistent. I wish I had better news." The drive home was silent. Isabel stared out the window, hiding her satisfaction. Dominic gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. His mind raced in circles, crashing against the same impossible wall. Sterile. Completely sterile. No chance. No hope. That night, Dominic stood in front of his bathroom mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back. For 37 years, he had been Dominic Caruso, the heir, the ghost, the man who would continue his father's legacy, build something greater, pass it on to his sons. Now he was nothing, just a broken man who couldn't give his family the one thing they needed. He thought about his mother's photograph on his desk, about the children he had imagined teaching to ride bikes, to throw punches, to navigate the world he had inherited, about Elena, beautiful, broken Elena, and the future he had secretly begun to dream of with her. Gone. All of it. Gone. He slammed his fist into the mirror. Glass shattered. Blood dripped from his knuckles. He didn't feel it. He couldn't feel anything anymore. In her servants' quarters, Elena heard about the results through whispered gossip among the staff. "Mr. Caruso can't have children," they murmured. "Tests came back today. Mrs. Caruso is devastated." Elena pressed her hand against her stomach, against the secret growing inside her. Impossible. The tests had to be wrong. She was carrying his child. She knew it. But she couldn't say anything. Not now. Not when the entire household was watching. All she could do was wait and pray. That piece of paper didn't just steal Dominic's dream of fatherhood. It was about to steal everything he had ever built and everyone he had ever loved. The dominoes fell faster than Dominic could have imagined. 3 days after the diagnosis, Isabel's lawyer delivered divorce papers to his study. She didn't even bother to hand them to him personally, just sent a messenger like he was a business transaction being closed. "I didn't marry you to remain childless," she said coldly when he confronted her. "This marriage was supposed to produce an heir. You can't fulfill that obligation. We're done. No negotiation. No discussion. Just a signature line and a demand for half his personal assets." But Isabel's betrayal was only the beginning. Victoria Blackwell moved with the precision of a surgeon cutting out a tumor. Within days, she had called a meeting of the allied families, Moretis, Castellanos, De Lucas, at a restaurant that had hosted underworld summits for decades. Dominic wasn't invited, but he heard about it. "A man who cannot produce an heir cannot lead," Victoria announced to the gathered bosses. "The Caruso bloodline ends with him. What kind of empire has no future?" She smiled that venomous smile. "Perhaps it's time to reconsider the balance of power in this city." The whispers spread like wildfire. In bars, in back rooms, in the streets Dominic had controlled for years. The ghost is impotent. The ghost is weak. The ghost is finished. Giovanni summoned him on a Tuesday evening. Dominic walked into his father's study, expecting support, expecting his own blood to stand beside him against the vultures circling their family. Instead, he found Giovanni sitting behind his desk with the weariness of a man who had already made an impossible decision. "Sit down, Dominic. Father, I know what Victoria's been saying, but sit down." Dominic sat. Giovanni couldn't meet his eyes. His fingers drummed against the desk, a nervous habit Dominic had never seen before. The families are losing confidence, Giovanni said quietly. Victoria is poisoning every alliance we've spent decades building. If we don't act decisively, everything falls apart. Then let me handle it. Let me prove. There's nothing to prove. Giovanni's voice cracked. You can't give us an heir, Dominic. That's not an accusation. That's a medical fact. A piece of paper. You're throwing me out because of a piece of paper? Giovanni finally looked up. His eyes were wet. I'm asking you to step back, temporarily, until things stabilize. Step back. Dominic laughed a hollow, broken sound. You mean disappear? You mean let Marco take my place? Marco Santini, his ambitious cousin who had been circling the throne for years, who smiled too much and talked too smoothly, who had never hidden his desire to wear the crown. Marco will serve as interim leader, Giovanni confirmed. Just until what? Dominic rose from his chair, fury and anguish warring in his chest. Until I magically produce children? Until Victoria decides I'm worthy again? Until the families trust us again. The families trusted me. Dominic slammed his palm on the desk. I built this empire beside you. I bled for it. And you're choosing them over me? Over your own son? Giovanni said nothing. His silence was the cruelest answer of all. That night, Dominic packed a single suitcase. He walked through the mansion one last time, past the study where he had worked countless nights, past the kitchen where Elena had brought him coffee, past the bedroom he had shared with no one who loved him. The staff avoided his eyes. The guards he had trusted for years looked through him like he was already a ghost, the real kind now. At the front door, he paused, turned around. No one came to say goodbye. Not his father, not his cousin, not a single person in the house he had called home for 37 years. Dominic Caruso stepped into the night, alone. In 1 week, Dominic Caruso went from king to exile. But the cruelest cut wasn't losing his empire, it was watching Elena walk away the very next morning, taking with her a secret that could have saved him. Elena discovered the truth by accident. The night before Dominic was exiled, she was cleaning the hallway outside the sunroom when she heard voices. Victoria and Isabel, speaking in hushed tones, unaware that anyone was listening. Elena pressed herself against the wall, barely breathing. The results were fake, weren't they? Isabel's voice carried a hint of amusement. Of course they were. Victoria laughed softly. Harrington has been following my orders for 30 years. He knows better than to disappoint me. And Dominic has no idea? None. He actually believes he's sterile. The fool. Elena's blood turned to ice. Fake. The results were fake. Dominic could have children. He wasn't broken. She wanted to run, to find him, to scream the truth from the rooftops. But her hand moved instinctively to her stomach, to the 2-month secret growing inside her. If she spoke now, Victoria would know. Victoria would connect the dots. And Elena knew exactly what happened to people who threatened Victoria Blackwell's plans. They disappeared. She had survived too much to die now. And she wasn't alone anymore. She was carrying a life that depended on her survival. So Elena stayed silent. And she made a decision. The next morning, she found Dominic in his study. He looked like a corpse. His eyes were hollow, red-rimmed, empty of the fire that had once burned in them. His suit was wrinkled. Dominic, who had never worn a wrinkled suit in his life. A half-empty whiskey bottle sat on his desk. He didn't look up when she entered. Mr. Caruso? Her voice trembled. I need to speak with you. What is it? I'm leaving. Today. I'm resigning. Now he looked up. Something flickered in those dead eyes. Pain, confusion, betrayal. Why? Elena's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. She wanted to cross the room, to hold him, to tell him everything. You're not sterile. The tests were lies. I'm carrying your children. We can fight this together. But she saw how broken he was, how close to the edge. If she told him about the conspiracy, he would confront Victoria. And in his current state, emotional, reckless, alone, he would lose. Victoria would destroy him completely, and Elena would be killed for knowing too much. Or worse, their child would be killed. I just have to go, she whispered. Please don't ask me why. Dominic stared at her for a long moment. The last light of hope died in his eyes. Fine. His voice was hollow. Go. Everyone else has. Why should you be any different? The words cut deeper than any knife. Elena walked toward the door, her legs shaking, tears streaming down her face. She paused at the threshold, her back to him. Tell him, her heart screamed. Tell him the truth. But her hand touched her stomach again. Protect the baby. Survive. Find another way. Goodbye, Dominic, she whispered. He didn't respond. She walked out of the mansion, out of his life, carrying his children and the truth that could have saved him. She thought she was protecting him by leaving. She didn't know she was taking away the one thing that could have saved him, the truth. And for the next 2 years, both of them would pay the price. The free clinic smelled like bleach and despair. Elena sat on a paper-covered examination table, shivering in a thin hospital gown, while a tired nurse ran an ultrasound wand across her growing belly. "Well," the nurse said, squinting at the grainy screen, "there's a surprise." Elena's heart stopped. "What? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." The nurse turned the monitor toward her. "You're having twins." 2 heartbeats flickered on the screen, 2 tiny forms curled together in the darkness of her womb. Twins. Elena had $847 to her name. No insurance, no family, no home, and now 2 babies. She tried to reach Dominic. 50 times she called the Caruso mansion from payphones, feeding quarters into the slot with trembling hands. Every call was blocked. Every number she tried disconnected or redirected to voicemail boxes that were never checked. She went to the Caruso business offices downtown. Security guards grabbed her arms before she made it past the lobby. "Mr. Caruso doesn't see visitors. Please, I have to talk to him. It's urgent. It's about ma'am. If you don't leave, we'll call the police." What Elena didn't know was that Giovanni had given explicit orders. Anyone connected to Dominic's previous life was to be turned away. No exceptions, no explanations. Dominic's old world had erased him completely, and by extension, it had erased her too. She worked until her body screamed for mercy, cleaning houses during the day, washing dishes at a diner at night, babysitting on weekends. Every dollar went toward rent, food, and the prenatal vitamins she couldn't afford but couldn't live without. At 7 months, her body gave out. She collapsed in the kitchen of a house she was cleaning, contractions ripping through her abdomen. The homeowner called an ambulance. A doctor at the county hospital told her she would lose the babies if she didn't stop working immediately. "Complete bed rest," he said sternly. "No exceptions." But bed rest meant no income. No income meant no food. Elena sold everything. Her phone, her clothes, except for 2 outfits. The gold ring her mother had pressed into her hand on that desert highway 15 years ago. The only thing she had left of her parents. $1,200. Enough to survive 2 months. She spent those months lying on a mattress on the floor of a rented room, eating rice and beans, talking to her babies. "Your father doesn't know about you," she whispered to her belly every night. "But he would love you. I know he would." The birth was agony. County General Hospital. A ward with 20 beds separated by thin curtains. No private room. No pain medication. She couldn't afford the epidural. Elena gripped the bed rails until her knuckles turned white. She bit down on a pillow to muffle her screams. 16 hours of labor, alone, surrounded by strangers. Luca came first, screaming, furious, fighting his way into the world. Matteo followed 4 minutes later, quieter, calmer, but with the same storm-gray eyes. Their father's eyes. Elena held them both against her chest, sobbing with exhaustion and joy and heartbreak. "You have his eyes," she whispered. "Both of you. You're his. You're ours." The next 2 years blurred together in a haze of exhaustion. Elena worked the night shift, cleaning offices 10 at night until 6 in the morning, while Mrs. Johnson, a 68-year-old widow in the apartment next door, watched the twins for free. "You remind me of my daughter, Mrs." Johnson said when Elena tried to pay her. She struggled too. "Let me help." Elena slept 2 or 3 hours a day. She used cloth diapers because disposables cost too much. She heated formula on a camp stove when the gas got shut off. She wore the same 2 outfits for 2 years. But Luca and Matteo never went hungry, never went cold, never doubted they were loved. Every night, after she came home from work, Elena would sit between their cribs and watch them sleep. "Your father doesn't know you exist," she would whisper. "But one day, I'll find a way to tell him. I promise." Elena survived hell for the second time, not for herself, but for 2 tiny lives who carried the eyes of the man she loved. And every night, she whispered to them, "Your father doesn't know you exist. But one day, I'll find a way to tell him." The rain kept falling. Dominic remained on his knees, the cold pavement soaking through his worn trousers, his eyes fixed on the 2 small faces that mirrored his own. His mind couldn't process what he was seeing. His heart couldn't contain what he was feeling. "Why?" The word tore from his throat like broken glass. "Why didn't you tell me?" Elena's tears mixed with the rain streaming down her cheeks. "Because you were already destroyed, Dominic. When I left, you were barely alive. I thought if I told you about the pregnancy, it would break you completely." "Break me?" He laughed bitterly. "Elena, I spent 2 years believing I was worthless, that I couldn't give anyone the one thing that mattered. And the whole time, I know." Her voice cracked. "I know. I thought I was protecting you, protecting me." He shook his head slowly. "You took away the only thing that could have saved me. The truth. Proof that those test results were lies. I tried to find you." Elena's words tumbled out desperately. "I called the mansion 50 times. I went to your offices. They blocked me. They turned me away. Giovanni gave orders that nobody connected to your old life could reach you." Dominic closed his eyes. Of course his father had done that, cutting off the past, erasing the failure, pretending the heir who couldn't produce heirs had never existed. "Mommy?" The small voice cut through the storm. Luca, the braver one, Elena had said, was tugging at her sleeve, his storm-gray eyes wide with confusion. "Mommy, why is the man crying?" Dominic looked at his son. His son. The word felt foreign and sacred all at once. Matteo, quieter and more observant, stepped forward. Without fear, without hesitation, he reached out and touched Dominic's wet cheek. "Are you sad?" Matteo asked softly. Something shattered inside Dominic's chest. Not painfully this time, more like ice breaking apart to let warmth flood through. He pulled both boys into his arms. They smelled like cheap soap and rain and innocence. They felt small and fragile and perfect. Luca squirmed a little, curious about this strange man hugging them. Matteo relaxed into the embrace, somehow understanding something his brother didn't. Dominic held them and wept. 2 years. He had missed 2 years of their lives. First words, first steps, first everything, because of lies, because of Victoria, because of a piece of paper that stole his future. But they were here now. They existed. They were real. Behind them, the bus arrived with a hiss of brakes. The doors opened. The driver waited. Nobody moved. The doors closed. The bus pulled away. Dominic released the twins and rose slowly to his feet. The rain plastered his hair to his forehead, dripped from his jaw, soaked through what remained of his expensive suit. He took Elena's hand. "Come with me," he said. "Dominic, I don't have much anymore. A room in a cheap motel. Freelance work that barely pays the bills. I'm not the man I used to be. I never loved the man you used to be." Elena squeezed his hand. "I loved the man underneath. The one who hated violence. The one who wanted a family. The one who held me in the dark and made me feel safe. Then come with me, you and the boys. We'll figure out the rest together." Elena looked at her sons, their sons standing in the rain, watching their parents with wide, confused eyes. She looked back at Dominic. "I don't need a mansion," she whispered. "I just need you. Really here. Really present. I'm here." He pressed his forehead to hers. "I'm not going anywhere. Not ever again." Luca tugged at Dominic's wet jacket. "Are you coming with us, mister?" Dominic knelt down again, meeting his son's eyes. "Actually, buddy, I was hoping you would come with me. If that's okay." Luca considered this seriously. Then he looked at his brother. Matteo nodded. "Okay," Luca declared. "But you have to carry me. My legs are tired." For the first time in 2 years, Dominic smiled. He lifted Luca onto his hip, took Elena's hand in his, and watched as Matteo grabbed his mother's other hand. 4 people walked into the rain that night, a broken king, a survivor, and 2 children who had never known their father. They had nothing but each other. And somehow, that was enough. The motel room was barely 200 square feet, one sagging bed pushed against water-stained wallpaper, a bathroom with a dripping faucet, a window that looked out onto a parking lot where drug deals happened after midnight. This was home now. Dominic insisted Elena and the twins take the bed. He slept on the floor with a thin blanket, his back against the cold tile. After 2 years of cheap motels, he was used to discomfort, but nothing prepared him for the terror of that first night. Around 3 in the morning, Matteo started burning up. His small body radiated heat like a furnace. His breathing turned shallow and rapid. "Dominic." Elena's voice was sharp with panic. "Something's wrong." He pressed his hand to Matteo's forehead and felt fire. They had no car, no money for a taxi. Dominic scooped his son into his arms and ran. 12 blocks to the county hospital, through empty streets slicked with rain, his lungs screaming, his legs burning, Matteo whimpering against his chest. The emergency room was a nightmare of fluorescent lights and endless waiting. 5 hours on plastic chairs while Matteo's fever climbed and Luca slept curled against Elena's side. Finally, a doctor saw them. "Ear infection," she said, scribbling on a prescription pad. "He needs antibiotics. Should clear up in a week." The pharmacy bill came to $200. Dominic had 80. He stood at the counter, shame burning through him. The most powerful man in Chicago reduced to counting crumpled bills while his son suffered. Elena appeared beside him. She pressed a fold of cash into his hand. "Take it. Elena, that's your rent money. Children first." Her voice was firm. "Always. We'll figure out the rest." They bought the medicine. They went back to the motel, and Dominic made a decision. He needed proof. The next morning, while Elena watched the boys, Dominic made a phone call he never thought he'd make. Doctor. Samuel Chen had been the Caruso family physician before Harrington, before Victoria's influence pushed him out, before the Blackwells rewrote history. Dominic Caruso. Chen's voice carried surprise. "I heard what happened to you. I'm sorry. I need your help, Samuel. I need you to run tests. Real tests. Silence. Then, come to my clinic. Tonight. After hours." The examination took 2 hours. Blood work, samples, DNA swabs from both Luca and Matteo, collected while they slept. 3 days later, Chen called with results. "Sit down, Dominic. Just tell me. Your sperm count is completely normal. Above average, actually. You are not, and have never been sterile." The words hit like a freight train. "And the boys, Luca and Matteo, are your biological sons. 99.98% match. No question." Dominic couldn't breathe. "There's more," Chen continued grimly. "I did some digging into Harrington, pulled some strings with old colleagues. What I found," he paused. "Harrington has been receiving payments from the Blackwell family for 30 years. Quarterly transfers. Hundreds of thousands of dollars total. For what? I found emails. Coded, but not coded enough. Victoria Blackwell specifically instructed him to falsify your results. Her exact words were, 'Make sure he can never have children.' On paper." Dominic's hand tightened around the phone until the plastic creaked. "Can you prove this?" "I have bank records, email transcripts, Harrington's original test results, the real ones buried in a file he thought no one would ever find." Chen's voice hardened. "They destroyed your life with a lie, Dominic. And I can prove it." That night, Dominic sat in the motel room, papers spread across the bed. Elena watched him from the doorway while the twins slept peacefully behind her. He held the DNA results in trembling hands. Luca Caruso. Father, Dominic Caruso. Match, 99.98%. Matteo Caruso. Father, Dominic Caruso. Match, 99.98%. His sons, his blood, his family. Everything had been a lie. He had sons. He had always been able to have children, and someone was going to pay for the 2 years of hell they had stolen from him. Dominic made the call at 7 in the morning. His finger hovered over Giovanni's number for a full minute before he pressed dial. 2 years of silence. 2 years of abandonment. 2 years of wondering if his father ever thought about him at all. Giovanni answered on the third ring. "Who is this?" "It's Dominic." Silence. Long and heavy. "Dominic." Giovanni's voice carried something Dominic couldn't identify. Surprise? Regret? "Why are you calling?" "Because you have 2 grandchildren, father. Twin boys. And I have proof that the test results were fake." The silence stretched longer this time. "Come to the house," Giovanni finally said. "Today. 3 o'clock. The line went dead. Elena dressed the twins in the cleanest clothes they owned, secondhand shirts and pants she had washed in the motel sink the night before. Dominic wore the same suit he'd been wearing for 2 years, threadbare but pressed. They arrived at the Caruso mansion at exactly 3. Dominic had forgotten how massive it was, how cold. The iron gates that once opened automatically for him now required a guard to verify his identity. The driveway that once felt like coming home now felt like enemy territory. Giovanni waited in the main foyer. At 67, he looked older than Dominic remembered. His hair had gone fully silver. His shoulders stooped slightly. The fire in his eyes had dimmed to embers. But when he saw Luca and Matteo, those embers flared. Giovanni froze mid-step. His breath caught audibly. His eyes moved from one boy to the other, taking in every detail: the black hair, the storm-gray eyes, the square jaw, the crescent birthmark behind Matteo's left ear. Identical to his son. Identical to himself. "Dio mio," Giovanni whispered. He dropped to his knees. The patriarch of the Caruso Empire, the man who had never bowed to anyone, knelt on the marble floor of his own foyer, eye level with 2 toddlers who stared at him with curious expressions. "They look exactly like you," Giovanni breathed. "Exactly like you did at that age." "They're mine," Dominic said coldly. "Despite what your trusted doctor claimed." Giovanni rose slowly, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Dominic handed him the folder test results, DNA analysis, bank records, email transcripts. Giovanni read each page in silence. Then he slammed his fist against the wall so hard the chandelier rattled. "Harrington," he snarled. "That bastard." Victoria paid him to lie. "She destroyed my son with a piece of paper, and his voice cracked. "I believed it. I chose their lies over my own blood." "Yes, you did." Giovanni turned to face Dominic. His eyes were wet. "I'm sorry." The words came out rough, as though they had been trapped inside him for years. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I'm sorry I sent you away. I'm sorry I chose the alliance over my own son. An apology doesn't give me back 2 years, Father." "No, it doesn't." Giovanni straightened, some of his old steel returning. "But I can give you back what's yours. Your position, your birthright, your place in this family." Dominic shook his head. "I don't want it handed to me. Not again. If I come back, I earn it. From the bottom up, I prove I deserve it." Giovanni studied his son for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Monday. Report to the main office. You'll start in operations. No special treatment. No shortcuts. Fine." Giovanni turned to Elena, who had been standing quietly with the twins throughout the confrontation. He walked toward her slowly, stopping a respectful distance away. Then, to Elena's shock, he bowed his head. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for raising my grandsons when no one else was there, for keeping them alive, for loving them enough to survive." Elena didn't know what to say. This man had ordered guards to throw her out, had blocked her calls, had erased her from Dominic's life. But looking at him now, humbled, broken, desperate to make amends, she saw something she recognized. A father trying to fix what he had destroyed. "They're good boys," she said softly. "They deserved better than what the world gave them. They'll have better now." Giovanni's voice hardened with promise. "I'll make sure of it." Father and son looked at each other across the chasm of 2 years of silence. For the first time, they chose family over pride. But Victoria Blackwell had already heard the news, and she was not going to lose without a fight. The informant's call came at midnight. Victoria Blackwell sat in her private study, a glass of aged scotch in her hand, when her phone buzzed with a number she recognized. One of her many eyes inside the Caruso organization. "What is it?" Dominic was at the mansion today, with 2 children, twin boys. Victoria's grip tightened on the glass. "What did you say?" "DNA tests confirmed it. The boys are his biological sons, born to that maid, Elena Vasquez. Giovanni has already started reconciliation. Dominic returns to work Monday." The glass shattered against the fireplace. Scotch and crystal exploded across the marble floor. Victoria stood in the center of the destruction, her chest heaving, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her palms. 2 years of planning, 2 years of manipulation, 2 years of carefully dismantling Dominic Caruso piece by piece, ruined by a maid, a nobody, a girl from the gutter who should have stayed invisible. "Get me Jonathan Pierce," Victoria hissed into the phone. "Tonight." Jonathan Pierce was not a lawyer. He was a weapon. For 30 years, he had built his reputation on one simple principle: winning at any cost. He had destroyed careers with fabricated evidence, bankrupted families with endless litigation, made children disappear into foster systems while their parents drowned in legal fees. The underworld called him the Butcher. By 3 a.m, he sat across from Victoria in her study, reviewing the file she had compiled on Elena Vasquez. "Interesting history," Pierce murmured, flipping through pages. "Orphaned at 12, foster care, trafficked at 16. He looked up with a predator's smile. "We can work with this. I want those children," Victoria said coldly. "I want them away from that woman." "On what grounds?" "Unfit mother, unstable background, history of prostitution. She was a trafficking victim, not a prostitute." "Does the distinction matter in family court?" Victoria's eyes glittered. "We frame it correctly. She looks like damaged goods. A woman with no stable income, no permanent address, raising children in motels and slums. Hardly the environment for Caruso heirs." Pierce nodded slowly. "I can file for emergency custody by morning. Claim the children are in immediate danger. It won't hold long, but it will terrify her. Make her desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. Do it." 3 days later, Elena answered a knock at the motel door. A process server shoved papers into her hands and disappeared before she could speak. Elena unfolded the documents with trembling fingers. Legal language swam before her eyes: custody petition, emergency hearing, allegations of parental unfitness. But certain phrases jumped out like knife wounds. History of involvement in illegal activities, rescued during FBI raid on trafficking operation, unstable living conditions, failure to provide adequate care. They had found her past, dug it up from the grave where she thought she had buried it forever, and now they were using it as a weapon. Elena's knees buckled. She slid down the wall, papers scattering across the stained carpet, tears streaming down her face. That's how Dominic found her when he returned from his first day back at work. "Elena?" He dropped beside her, gathering the papers, reading rapidly. His face cycled through confusion, comprehension, and finally fury. "Victoria," he growled. "This has her fingerprints all over it. They know everything." Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "The trafficking, the raid, all of it. They're calling me a prostitute, Dominic. They're saying I'm not fit to raise my own children. Our children." He pulled her into his arms. "And they're lying. You were a victim, Elena, not a criminal. You survived something that would have destroyed most people. But what if the court believes them? What if they take Luca and Matteo? They won't." Dominic's voice turned to steel. "I won't let them. We'll fight this. Together." Elena looked up at him through tear-blurred eyes. "How? Victoria has money, power, lawyers who eat people like me for breakfast. And we have the truth." He cupped her face in his hands. "We have proof that she falsified medical records. We have evidence of a 30-year conspiracy. And we have something she doesn't have." "What?" "Each other." He kissed her forehead gently. "You survived trafficking, Elena. You survived homelessness. You survived raising twins alone with nothing. A courtroom doesn't scare you. Victoria Blackwell doesn't scare you. You're the strongest person I've ever known." Elena closed her eyes, letting his words sink into the broken places inside her. He was right. She had survived worse than this, and she would survive this too. Victoria Blackwell had started a war, but she didn't know that Elena Vasquez had survived things far worse than any courtroom, and she would not back down. The Cook County family courthouse loomed like a cathedral of judgment. Elena stood at the bottom of the stone steps, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She wore a simple navy dress purchased from Goodwill for $12, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, no jewelry, no makeup except for a touch of lipstick to hide how pale fear had made her. Across the plaza, Victoria Blackwell emerged from a black Mercedes. She wore Chanel. Diamonds glittered at her throat and wrists. Her silver hair was swept into an elegant chignon. Beside her, Isabel looked equally polished, designer suit, perfect makeup, the picture of wealthy respectability. They looked like queens. Elena looked like what she was, a survivor clinging to hope with bleeding fingernails. "Don't let them intimidate you," Dominic murmured beside her. "They're the ones who should be afraid." Their lawyer, Catherine Walsh, met them at the courthouse doors. A former federal prosecutor with a reputation for destroying corrupt defendants. She had taken Elena's case pro bono after hearing the full story. "Remember," Catherine said as they walked toward the courtroom, "Pierce will try to provoke you, make you emotional, make you look unstable. Don't give him the satisfaction. Answer calmly. Tell the truth. Let your character speak for itself." The courtroom was smaller than Elena expected. Wood-paneled walls, hard benches, a judge's bench that seemed impossibly high. Judge Margaret Sullivan presided, a 60-year-old woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen every kind of human cruelty. Jonathan Pierce opened with a surgical strike. "Your Honor, we are here today because 2 innocent children are living in dangerous conditions with an unfit mother." He held up a thick folder. Elena Vasquez was apprehended during an FBI raid on a massage parlor in Las Vegas 7 years ago. A massage parlor that served as a front for prostitution. Elena's stomach dropped. She has no stable income, no permanent residence. For 2 years, she raised these children in poverty in apartments without heat, in rooms shared with strangers, in conditions no child should endure. Pierce turned to face Elena directly. "Miss Vasquez, isn't it true that you were arrested during a federal trafficking investigation?" Catherine rose. "Objection, Your Honor. Miss Vasquez was never arrested. She was rescued as a victim of human trafficking. FBI records clearly establish she was held against her will from age 16 to 19. "I'll allow the question," Judge Sullivan said. "But rephrase it appropriately, Mr. Pierce." Pierce smiled coldly. "Very well. Miss Vasquez, can you explain to the court how you came to be present during a federal raid on an illegal operation?" Elena's hands trembled. She gripped the witness stand and forced herself to meet Pierce's eyes. "I was kidnapped when I was 16, she said quietly. "I was held prisoner for 3 years. I was beaten when I tried to escape. I was forced to do things no child should ever have to do. And when the FBI broke down the door, I was the one hiding in a closet, praying someone would finally save me." Silence filled the courtroom. "I am not a criminal, Mr. Pierce. I am a survivor, Catherine called her witnesses. Mrs. Johnson, the 68-year-old neighbor, testified first. Her voice shook with emotion as she described watching Elena struggle. That girl worked the night shift cleaning offices. She would come home at 6 in the morning, and instead of sleeping, she would play with those babies, read to them, sing to them. I've raised 4 children of my own, and I've never seen a mother love her kids more than Elena loves hers. Father Rodriguez from the local parish spoke next. Elena volunteered at our food kitchen every Sunday. She would serve meals to the homeless while her own stomach was empty. When I asked her why, she said, "Because someone helped me once. I have to pass it on. That is not an unfit mother. That is a saint." But the testimony that shattered Victoria's case came from an unexpected source. Giovanni Caruso took the stand. The courtroom murmured as the patriarch of the Caruso family settled into the witness chair. Pierce looked visibly uncomfortable. He had expected Giovanni to stay neutral. "Mr. Caruso," Catherine began, "can you describe your relationship with Elena Vasquez?" Giovanni's eyes found Elena across the courtroom. 2 years ago, I made the worst mistake of my life. I believed lies about my own son. I threw him out of his home. I blocked every attempt he made to contact his family." His voice cracked. "And in doing so, I abandoned Elena, a woman who was carrying my grandchildren, to face the world alone." He straightened in his chair. "I have watched Elena with Luca and Matteo. I have seen her sacrifice everything for them. She is not unfit. She is extraordinary. And anyone who says otherwise is either lying or blind." Judge Sullivan called a recess to review the evidence. When she returned, her expression was granite. "I have reviewed the testimony and documentation presented by both parties. The petitioner's claims of parental unfitness are not supported by evidence. Miss Vasquez's history as a trafficking victim does not disqualify her from motherhood. If anything, it demonstrates remarkable resilience." She fixed Victoria with a cold stare. "The petition for emergency custody is denied. Furthermore, I am deeply troubled by the nature of this filing. If I see similar frivolous petitions from this party, I will consider sanctions for abuse of the judicial process." The gavel fell. Elena collapsed into Dominic's arms, sobbing with relief. They had won the first battle. But Victoria Blackwell never accepted defeat, and her next weapon would be far more devastating than any courtroom. The weeks following the trial brought unexpected blessings. Dominic threw himself into work with the intensity of a man reclaiming his birthright. He started in operations, just as he had promised Giovanni, reviewing accounts, visiting properties, rebuilding relationships with associates who had written him off. What he discovered made his blood boil. Marco Santini had been busy during his 2 years as interim boss. Hidden accounts in the Cayman Islands, phantom companies siphoning funds, contracts inflated by 40% with the difference vanishing into Marco's pockets, $15 million. Stolen from the family Marco had sworn to protect. Dominic presented the evidence to Giovanni in the same study where he had once been exiled. "I trusted him," Giovanni said, his face ashen. "My own nephew. Trust is earned, Father. Marco never earned anything. He only took." The family council convened that night. The evidence was irrefutable. Marco's fate was sealed before he even entered the room. In the mafia world, theft from family carried only one sentence. Marco Santini disappeared 3 days later. No body, no investigation, no questions asked. Dominic was officially restored as heir to the Caruso empire. But the greatest gift came on a quiet Tuesday morning. Elena had been feeling strange for weeks, exhausted, nauseous, emotional. She dismissed it as stress from the trial, but when the symptoms persisted, she bought a test from the pharmacy. Positive. She found Dominic in the study, reviewing contracts. He looked up when she entered, immediately noticing the tears streaming down her face. "Elena? What's wrong?" She couldn't speak. She simply placed the pregnancy test on his desk. Dominic stared at it, then at her, then back at the test. "You're pregnant." She laughed through her tears. Again, he was around the desk in 2 strides. He dropped to his knees, pressed his hands against her still flat stomach, and kissed it with a reverence that made her cry harder. "Thank you," he whispered against her skin. "Thank you for giving me everything I never deserved." For 3 beautiful weeks, they lived in hope. Then Victoria struck again. The headline exploded across the Chicago Sun-Times like a bomb. Mafia boss's secret affair with trafficking victim inside the Caruso scandal. The article was devastating. Photos of Elena in her maid's uniform. Quotes from anonymous sources describing her as a gold digger who seduced a married man. Details about the Las Vegas raid, twisted to imply she had been a willing participant rather than a victim. Within hours, the story went viral. Social media erupted with hashtags: Mafia scandal, Caruso affair, trafficked mistress. Strangers dissected Elena's life with gleeful cruelty. They called her a whore, a homewrecker, a scheming immigrant who had manipulated her way into wealth. The death threat started the next day. You don't belong here. Go back to Mexico. Your children deserve a real mother. Elena's phone buzzed constantly with messages from numbers she didn't recognize. Hateful words, violent fantasies, promises of harm. That night, Dominic found her locked in the bathroom. She sat on the cold tile floor, knees pulled to her chest, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. Her phone lay shattered against the wall where she had thrown it. Elena. He knelt beside her, gathering her into his arms. Elena, look at me. They won't let me forget, she gasped between sobs. I thought I escaped. I thought I built a new life. But they keep dragging me back. They keep making me that girl in the basement again. You're not that girl anymore. Then why does everyone still see her? Elena looked up at him with devastated eyes. Why can't they see who I am now? Why can't they see that I survived? Dominic held her tighter, his own heart breaking. Victoria had done this. Victoria had leaked the story, twisted the facts, weaponized Elena's trauma against her. The courtroom hadn't worked, so she had turned to the court of public opinion. And in that court, truth didn't matter, only perception. We'll fight this, Dominic promised. We'll tell your real story. How? No one wants to hear the real story. They want the scandal, the drama, the villain they can hate. Then we make them listen. Elena shook her head. You can't make people listen, Dominic. Trust me, I've been screaming my whole life, and no one ever heard. He cupped her face in his hands. Then stop screaming at them. Talk to them. Tell them who you really are. Not the victim, not the villain, the survivor. Something flickered in Elena's eyes, a spark of the strength that had carried her through hell twice before. The world was determined to define Elena by her darkest days, but she had one chance to rewrite her story, and she was about to take it. The decision came to her at 3 a.m. Elena lay awake in the darkness, listening to Dominic's steady breathing beside her, feeling the twins' warmth in the next room. The hateful messages still echoed in her mind. The headlines still burned behind her eyes. But somewhere between midnight and dawn, fear transformed into something else. Fury. She was done hiding, done letting others define her story, done being ashamed of surviving. I want to speak, she told Dominic over breakfast. On television. Myself. He set down his coffee cup. Elena, you don't have to, I need to. Her voice was steady. For myself. For our children. Someday Luca and Matteo will search their mother's name online. I want them to find my truth, not Victoria's lies. CNN agreed to an exclusive interview within 48 hours. The network studio felt cold and clinical. Bright lights, cameras everywhere, a famous anchor with perfectly styled hair and practiced sympathy in her eyes. Elena wore a simple white blouse. No jewelry except for a thin gold chain her mother had given her recovered years ago from a pawn shop where she had sold it to buy formula. Whenever you're ready, the anchor said gently. Elena took a breath and began. When I was 12 years old, my parents died trying to give me a better life. When I was 16, I was kidnapped by men who sold me like merchandise. For 3 years, I was locked in basements, beaten, starved, forced to do things no human being should endure. Her voice didn't waver. I was not a prostitute. I was a prisoner. I was a child who had no one to protect her. She described escaping during the FBI raid. The years of homelessness, teaching herself English from library books, working 3 jobs while pregnant with twins. I raised my sons alone. I fed them when I couldn't feed myself. I held them when I had nothing left to give. And I did it without asking anyone for help because I learned early that the world doesn't help people like me. The anchor leaned forward. In your relationship with Dominic Caruso? I fell in love with a man, not an empire. Elena's eyes found the camera. When I met Dominic, he had everything. When I loved him, he had nothing. I didn't choose him for his money. I chose him because he was the first person who looked at me and saw a survivor instead of a victim. What would you say to those who judge you? Elena paused. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of every battle she had ever fought. I don't need your acceptance. My children know who I am. Dominic knows who I am. God knows who I am. And that is enough. I spent years being ashamed of things that were done to me, not things I chose. I'm not ashamed anymore. I'm proud. Proud that I survived. Proud that I built a life from ashes. Proud that my sons will grow up knowing their mother never surrendered. The interview aired that night. By morning, the narrative had shifted. #Team Elena exploded across social media. Women shared their own stories of survival. Advocates praised her courage. An influencer with 2 million followers posted, "This woman raised twins alone while working night shifts and still stood up to face the world. That's not a victim, that's a queen." The tide turned so dramatically that even Isabel Blackwell issued a public statement. "I was complicit in harming an innocent woman," Isabel admitted in a video that shocked Chicago society. The medical results were falsified. Elena Vasquez was targeted unfairly. "I am deeply sorry for my part in this conspiracy." Victoria's empire of lies crumbled piece by piece. That night, Elena stood on the balcony of their new apartment, watching the Chicago skyline glitter against the darkness. Dominic joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "You were incredible," he murmured. "I was terrified." Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's speaking truth when your voice shakes. Elena leaned back against him, feeling his heartbeat against her spine. For the first time in her life, she had told her story on her own terms. She had faced the world without armor, without apology, without shame. Elena Vasquez had faced her demons in front of millions, and for the first time, she didn't tremble, she stood tall as a conqueror. 2 days before the wedding, Victoria Blackwell appeared at the Caruso mansion. Dominic barely recognized her. The woman who had once commanded rooms with her presence now looked like a ghost of herself. She had lost at least 20 pounds. Her designer clothes hung loose on her frame. Her hair, always perfectly styled, was thin and streaked with gray. She no longer bothered to hide. Her empire had crumbled completely. Old friends refused her calls. Social circles that had once revolved around her now pretended she didn't exist. And Isabel, her own daughter, had publicly denounced her and cut all ties. Victoria Blackwell had lost everything. "I came to apologize," she said, standing in the foyer where she had once walked like a queen, "not to ask forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that." Dominic studied her coldly. "Why now?" "Because I'm dying." Victoria's voice cracked. "Cancer. The doctors gave me 6 months, maybe less. And I realized I couldn't leave this world with so much hatred attached to my name. You destroyed my life. You tried to take my children. I know." Tears streamed down her hollow cheeks. "I was so consumed with power, with control, that I forgot what actually mattered. I turned my own daughter into a weapon. I manipulated a good doctor into committing fraud. I tried to destroy an innocent woman whose only crime was loving your son." She met his eyes. "I'm not asking you to forgive me, Dominic. I'm asking you to let me apologize. To Elena, to you, to your father, before it's too late." Dominic was silent for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised even himself. "You're invited to the wedding." Victoria's eyes widened. "What?" "Not because you deserve it. Because I need to prove to myself, to my children, that I'm capable of mercy, that I'm not the monster this world tried to make me." The wedding took place in the gardens of the Caruso estate. 200 guests filled white chairs arranged beneath a canopy of roses and wisteria. Sunlight filtered through the branches of ancient oak trees. A string quartet played softly as the ceremony began. Giovanni Caruso walked Elena down the aisle. She wore a simple ivory gown, elegant but understated. Her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders in soft waves. In her hands, she carried white roses mixed with wildflowers from a small garden she had planted with the twins. She had never looked more beautiful. Luca and Matteo walked ahead of her, carefully carrying velvet pillows with the wedding rings. Luca kept glancing back to make sure his mother was following. Matteo walked with solemn concentration, determined not to drop his precious cargo. At the altar, Dominic waited. When their eyes met, everything else disappeared. The guests, the flowers, the music. There was only Elena, the woman who had seen him at his worst and loved him anyway. The officiant spoke traditional words, but neither truly heard them. They were lost in each other. Then came the vows. Dominic spoke first, his voice thick with emotion. "Elena, 2 years ago, I lost everything. My family, my name, my reason to live. I was a dead man walking until you found me. You brought me back from the grave. You gave me sons I never knew I had. You showed me that love isn't about power or status. It's about choosing someone every single day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." He squeezed her hands. "You are my light, Elena, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you." Elena's tears fell freely as she spoke her own vows. "Dominic, I spent my whole life surviving loss, surviving pain, surviving a world that tried to break me. But with you, I don't want to just survive anymore. I want to live, really live. With you, with our children, with whatever future we build together. She smiled through her tears. You're my home, Dominic. The first real home I've ever had. They exchanged rings, they kissed, and 200 guests rose to their feet in applause. As the celebration began, Victoria approached Elena quietly. She held out a small velvet box. These pearls have been in my family for 5 generations, Victoria said softly. I'm not worthy of calling myself family, but please take them. For your daughter, someday, and tell your children that even the worst people can learn to regret. Elena accepted the box with trembling hands. Thank you, she whispered. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was a beginning. Under the Chicago sunset, Elena Vasquez became Elena Caruso. The girl the world had trampled now stood as a queen beside her king. Sunday morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the Caruso mansion. The dining room echoed with the sounds of family, the kind of sounds Dominic had dreamed of his entire life but never thought he would hear. Batman is stronger, Luca declared, slamming his small fist on the table. No way, Mateo shot back. Spider-Man can stick to walls and shoot webs. Batman just has money. Batman is smart. That's better than webs. At 7.5 years old, the twins had grown into confident, spirited boys. Luca remained the brave one, always first to climb trees, first to defend his siblings, first to challenge anyone who disagreed with him. Mateo was the thinker, quieter, more observant, with their father's storm-gray eyes that seemed to see everything. Across the table, 4-year-old Sofia sat on Giovanni's lap, carefully repeating Italian words after her grandfather. No, come si dis butterfly. Farfalla piccola mia. Farfalla. Sofia giggled. That's a funny word. Giovanni, now 72, had transformed completely. The fierce patriarch who once commanded an empire now spent his days building block towers and reading fairy tales. His grandchildren had given him something power never could piece. Elena watched from the doorway, one hand resting on her 5-month pregnant belly. Baby number 4, a boy, the doctors said. They would name him Marco, not after the cousin who had betrayed them, but after Elena's father, the man who had died trying to give her a better life. So much had changed in 5 years. Dominic had systematically transformed the Caruso business empire. The gambling operations were gone. The protection rackets dissolved. In their place stood legitimate enterprises, real estate development, a chain of Italian restaurants, a construction company that employed hundreds. It wasn't easy. Old associates resisted. Some relationships ended permanently. But Dominic had made a promise to Elena on their wedding night. Their children would never inherit blood money. Elena had found her own purpose. The Rising Light Foundation, which she had established 3 years ago, now operated shelters and support programs for trafficking survivors across 5 states. Every week, she received letters from women she had helped, women who had escaped the same darkness she once knew. You saved my life, they wrote. You showed me survival was possible. Victoria had died 14 months ago. The cancer had been merciless, reducing her to a shadow within weeks. Near the end, Elena had visited her in the hospice. I forgive you, Elena had said, holding Victoria's frail hand. Not because you deserve it, because I refuse to carry hatred in my heart anymore. My children deserve a mother free from bitterness. Victoria had wept perhaps the only genuine tears she had ever shed. She died that night, peacefully, Elena hoped. Forgiven, at least by the one person who had every right to hate her forever. That evening, after the children were asleep, Elena and Dominic stood together on the balcony overlooking the gardens where they had married. Chicago glittered beneath them, a city of shadows and light, pain and beauty. Can I ask you something? Elena said softly. Anything. If you could go back and change everything, the lies, the exile, the years of suffering, would you? Dominic considered the question carefully. No, he finally said, because every moment of pain led me to you, to our children, to this life. He pulled her close. I wouldn't trade a single scar if it meant losing what we have now. Elena smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. Hell created us, she whispered, and we turned it into heaven. They kissed under the Chicago moonlight, the Mafia king and the girl the world forgot. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was proof that real love doesn't need perfect conditions. It only needs 2 people who choose each other, every day, until death do them part. Dear friends, thank you for staying with us through this entire journey. This story carries a profound message. No matter how deep you fall, no matter how dark your past, redemption is always possible. True love doesn't require perfection. It requires courage, forgiveness, and the choice to keep fighting for each other. Elena's journey reminds us that we are not defined by what happens to us, but but by how we rise from it. And Dominic's transformation shows that even the most powerful among us need love to find meaning. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe that love can survive any storm, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss our daily stories. Give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to remember that happy endings exist, but only for those brave enough to fight for them. We would love to hear from you. How did this story make you feel? Does it connect with your own life experiences? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your words inspire us to keep creating stories that touch hearts and uplift souls. We wish everyone watching good health, daily joy, and peace in your hearts. Goodbye for now, and we will see you in the next video. Take care of yourselves and the ones you love.